Sony's mandatory PSN linking requirement for PC players has been mired in controversy for what feels like months now. And to no one's surprise, Sony execs claim to have learned from their past mistakes, all while this divisive practice still remains in place. But now, with Sony brass doubling down in a recent investors call. Welcome to the channel. This is LtBuzzLitebeer, and at the epicenter of this controversy is Helldivers 2, a game that is very much near and dear to my heart. I mean, at this point, I'm well over 500 hours sunk into it, and for many, HD2 is on the very short list for 2024's Game of the Year awards. And all of this despite Sony pulling one of the most controversial plays in modern gaming history. Though to be clear here, there are many more games tangled up in this disaster, and the implications are far-reaching. And that's what I want to take a look at today. Remember to hit subscribe and ring that notifications bell to receive my upload alerts, and let's get into it. Sony originally began using its PlayStation PC label back in 2021 and has seen success with this portion of the market. Now, one can look to their popular God of War franchise, which is reported to have sold over 4 million copies on Steam, seeing Kratos return in God of War, with overwhelmingly positive ratings and an all-time concurrent peak player count of 73,500 in January of 2022, the very same month the game released. Spider-Man Remastered saw much the same results, selling a reported 2.5 million copies on Steam and reaching an all-time peak of over 66,000 players, alongside overwhelmingly positive ratings, while more recently, Ghost of Tsushima, the director's cut, went to market in May 2024, sold somewhere around 1.5 to 1.6 million copies, again on Steam, and saw an all-time concurrent player peak of just over 77,000 players achieved just after launch day. It's important to mention all three of these games together because they do share a commonality, that being delayed PC release dates. You see, God of War originally released in April 2018 and didn't enter the PC market until nearly 4 years later. Spider-Man Remastered dropped originally in November 2020, and it took 2 years to arrive on Steam, while Ghost of Tsushima was originally launched in mid-2020 with the director's cut PC port and additional features like the Legends Online co-op mode, again arriving nearly 4 years later. Now, while these titles individually did well, they were effectively old games when they arrived on PC. In the gaming industry, 4 weeks, or for that matter 4 months, is an eternity, let alone 4 years. And with modern console hardware like the PlayStation 5 making these games available day one, PC gamers had effectively seen and done this already, and the sales figures show us that. They're down across the board. Then along comes the enigma, Helldivers 2, from an unlikely source, Arrowhead Games, which was a third-party studio, relatively unknown, and certainly without the massive financial backing and advertising budgets of Sony's first-party studios. Now, it arrived on PC and PlayStation day one, and absolutely took the games industry by storm. You see, Helldivers 2 launched in February 2024, and after just 3 months of sales, had already amassed over 12 million copies sold, becoming the fastest-selling PlayStation game ever, prompting this headline from PCGamer, quote, "There are more Helldivers than there are Swedes." But while everything looked incredible on the surface for both Arrowhead and their partners Sony PlayStation, and of course their mega breakout success Helldivers 2, a violent storm was brewing underneath that would rock this high-flying democracy-spreading community to its very core. Sony dropped that bomb on May the 2nd, informing PC players that a suspension on the mandatory PSN linking requirements had now expired, giving those players just a month to conform to Sony's demands, or they would not be able to play Helldivers 2. Period. Now, many players were caught off guard, myself included. The PSN linking requirements tab was buried halfway down the Steam page, which I honestly never look at, and the endgame prompt had long since been disabled by the studios themselves for, oddly enough, performance reasons. Now, it turns out the then Arrowhead CEO Johan Pilstedt had called for the disabling of this PSN linking rule because it was wreaking havoc with server infrastructure and matchmaking. Seemingly overnight, Sony had officially declared war on its PC player base, and the response here was one of, if not the most, coordinated and comprehensive rebukes of corporate greed I've ever seen in modern gaming history. You see, Steam alone saw over 220,000 negative reviews posted within days of Sony's resurrection of the PSN linking rule. Also, something that is absolutely insane to see these days was an Arrowhead community dev themselves actively encouraging players to review bomb the game and to push Steam for refunds, saying things like, want people to make their displeasure known in a place where it might actually make a difference? Steam reviews and refund requests will do that. They also said to make their displeasure known while also noting Arrowhead Game Studios is on the side of the players during this controversy. Ultimately, these kind of statements cost the community dev their job, but we now know there was even more that had been going on behind the scenes as players were now diving into Sony disclosures, finding that just days after their Steam statement and requirement date for PSN account creation and linking, Sony had gone in through the back door and changed their TOS verbiage after the fact. You can see here that on May the 3rd, the day after that announcement, it read, signing into PSN is optional when playing a PlayStation game on PC. But on May the 4th, 2 days after the requirement notice, it had now been changed to some PlayStation games may require you sign in and link to an account for PSN. The community pushback here was so incredibly severe that Sony ended up pulling the plug on this requirement just 4 days later with this announcement. Quote, Helldivers fans, we've heard your feedback on the Helldivers 2 account linking update. The May 6th update, which would have required Steam and PlayStation Network account linking for new players and for current players beginning May 30th, will not be moving forward. We're still learning what is best for PC players. I would argue that you have learned nothing, Sony, and your feedback has been invaluable. Thanks again for your continued support of Helldivers 2, and we'll keep you updated on future plans. Now, alongside this, we saw headlines like this one from Paul Tassi over at Forbes reading, quote, Sony is going to destroy its PC PlayStation expansion before it starts with PSN requirement, where Tassi actually touches on not only Helldivers 2, but also Ghost of Tsushima, which was caught up in all of this, and its online multiplayer mode, which required the creation of a PSN account, leading to refunds for those that were region locked and could not create one. At the time, I clipped and saved this response, which I found both quite comedic and very truthful, from the popular YouTube channel Gamers Nexus, and it serves as a translation, a response to Sony's PSN declaration. Here's what Gamers Nexus said, quote, we're still learning how far we can push the line. We will reconvene in the boardroom on Monday to devise a draconian plan to push the line slower so that it is less noticeable next time. Sony PlayStation, still learning since 1994. And overall, this has to be the theme, right? Especially with Sony's entrance into the PC gaming market. They are completely tone deaf and oblivious to this very large and lucrative market segment, overall thinking that, hey, what works best for our console gamers will of course work for our PC crowd, and think what you will, but it clearly doesn't. These are two completely different markets that require nuance and they require understanding. Now, from all of this, Sony just went full scorched earth and delisted Helldivers 2 and all subsequent releases in over 177 countries and regions where PSN does not exist, almost like an adolescent gamer rage quitting. If they can't have full control of whatever and whatever they want, then they are not playing the game. Sony claims it's all about gamer safety, but let's be clear here. This is about investors, this is about money, and this is about control. To be thorough, we've also seen Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered go through its own PSN PC requirements issues alongside God of War Ragnarok, which, by the way, debuted in September 2024 on Steam PC to tepid player counts, reaching an all-time peak of just 35,615 players, which is staggeringly low for an acclaimed God of War title. Now, to be fair, Horizon Zero Dawn did experience terrible game-breaking issues at launch, but on the flip side, God of War was a much smoother release, yet both saw sales numbers far below what I would expect Sony to have predicted. The other eerie similarity is that both are strictly single-player experiences, and both are still held to the same requirements of creating a PSN account and linking it to your Steam game. For reference, here's the God of War Ragnarok sign-in screen, and it will not let you into the game until it confirms that you have an active PSN account link, prompting both outrage and mass refunds. There's also confusion still ongoing with Sony and the requirements. As you can clearly see here on the PlayStation Direct website, you can select any of these games. And on the question of PSN accounts to play PlayStation games on PC, it says this, quote, "No, you currently do not need a PSN account to enjoy PlayStation Studios games on PC, but you will need a Steam account to redeem your voucher code. Some of our PlayStation Studios titles also offer incentives for linking your Steam and PSN accounts." Now, I mentioned all of this to lead up to yesterday, and I'm sorry about that long build-up, but I like to have the proper context and backstory in place before building on those facts, which again leads us to yesterday, to Sony's most recent investors call, and we got some interesting sales figures, some obvious omissions, and a crystal clear doubling down of Sony's stance to control its PC player base and market. Here's the headline. Sony isn't giving up on PSN account requirement for PC games. Company president says it's necessary so people can safely play its games. Hiroki Titoki admitted the requirement invites pushback, but Sony wants to maintain control over its games. Most of this was quickly translated from Japanese to English, a fact PCGamer acknowledges, but here's what Titoki, the co-CEO for Sony, had to say. "We have learned a lot. The way to face the issues regarding PC, for instance, the PlayStation accounts that we have offered, by offering them, for instance, sometimes that tends to invite pushback. But for the live service games, in order to maintain order of the gaming so that anybody can enjoy the game safely, we need to create an environment conducive to that and, of course, enjoying the game freely." Quote, "Having some restrictions, we may not call it a rule, but to ask the users and gamers to follow the manner, and that balance is very important. We have to continue to seek the best way to achieve this." Small translation errors aside, Titoki is not mincing words here. Sony is being very clear on their position and what they are demanding: total control. Now, PCGamer then goes on to outline much of what I've already spelled out for you, but they did point this out in the final portion of the article. This makes Titoki's comments a little tough to swallow at face value. He talked about live service games specifically, and fair enough. If you want to use our servers, you have to play by our rules, is a reasonable ask. I would say I wholeheartedly disagree with that point, but God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Zero Dawn are single-player games, so what's the need for a PSN account there? Of course, comboed with Titoki's public statements, Sony released some total sales numbers, including many of their popular titles. And by the way, these are in millions of units sold. First, you see Helldivers 2 down there combining PS5 and PC for 12 million units sold. And interesting that the number sampled ends as of May the 5th, 2024, right when the tidal wave of negative reviews came pouring in and Sony delisted the game in over 170 countries and regions. Ghost of Tsushima's director's cut is listed here rather confusingly, where Sony shows everything from the original PS4 release to the PC release coming in at 13 million total copies sold. What games are missing here? Well, notably, God of War Ragnarok on PC and Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered. Both games that are under that forced PSN requirement restriction, despite being solely single-player experiences, and again, both are delisted for sale in over 170 countries and regions. And one could argue that that was not the real reason that they are not on this chart, because it really boils down to the fact that the PC market has not gravitated to them, and they have not sold well at all. For those of you interested, the humiliating downfall and epic financial disaster known as Concord was also a topic for discussion, as Titoki was quoted as saying, "Currently, we are still in the process of learning." Yeah, how did that go? Basically, with regards to new IP, of course, you don't know the results until you actually try it. When there are results, however, Sony does use them for future reference. Titoki also went on to discuss their internal testing and evaluation process, explaining that those checks should have been done much sooner as it relates to Concord, ultimately finishing with, quote, "I think that could have been much smoother." Now, I've spoken about Concord here once in the past, but when you make a game like that, where alarm bells should have been ringing years ago, and despite the overwhelmingly negative reactions you get from your trailers and the open beta, you as a company still sign off on it and ship it, well, then you reap what you sow. And we know from reports that Concord cost Sony hundreds of millions, sold little to no copies, and ultimately resulted in the total closure of Firewalk Studios, the developers behind that doomed venture. Despite record profits for this quarter, as announced by Sony in this quarterly statement, the PC releases are still rather mixed. Breakout hit Helldivers 2 is absolutely carrying this report for PC sales, with a distant second being Ghost of Tsushima. Now, where Sony might want to start looking at is with their first-party titles and how they're not connecting. God of War Ragnarok and Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered are notable omissions from this report, and clearly there's a direct clash between mandatory PSN linking requirements and PC gamers that just want a game. Sony claims this is for our protection, for PC gamers, to keep the gaming environment safe, but PC gamers are asking, safe from who? You might have some form of an argument, albeit a weak one, for protection when it comes to an online multiplayer environment. But when it comes to single-player only experiences, Sony doesn't have any sort of answer for that argument. Also, another point of contention is Sony's past track record with user data. Breaches are all too common, and Steam gamers argue they shouldn't have to give a company that's porous with its security measures their information when they've already provided most of it to Steam. Listen, not to beat around the bush here anymore, but Sony just wants to pump up its profits. They want to impress the shareholders, and you can only do that by increasing revenue streams. More money made means more investor confidence. More investor confidence translates to more shares sold. But you can't see that kind of growth that you need by selling 4-year-old games as PC ports. So instead, you have to turn to other areas. The first and most lucrative is data collection and the selling of that data. More players in the PlayStation ecosystem means more data. And that, my friends, is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. Also, forcing more players into the PlayStation ecosystem pumps up the active player numbers, which is something you can slap your chest about, brag about it on investors' calls, and again, pump up investor confidence. Also, more active players translates to more players buying more PlayStation games, because as a gamer who might have already been forced into a Sony-only storefront, you might just throw up your hands and say, well, shit, I'm already here. I might as well check out what Sony has to sell. And for those of you out there really forming up the tinfoil hats, there's a theory that the PSN requirements could be pivotal one day when Sony takes revenge on Steam and pulls all their titles from the Valve platform, forcing gamers to make a seriously difficult choice of don't play the game you love, or hey, come on over to the PlayStation Network where you get to play your Helldivers, you get to play your God of Wars, and you get to play your Spider-Man games. You've already gone in and created your PSN logon credentials. Now all you need to do is use them on our Sony-controlled and monitored launcher. By the way, for the record, I do not subscribe to that last theory, but it's definitely out there floating around in the internet ether. Now, what happens from here is going to be truly interesting, and it's definitely a topic worthy of following. Now, for their part, Sony is not backing down, and they're willing to risk potential growth and untold amounts of money from those 170 plus regions and countries, all in the name of gaining full and unrestricted control. Is this a waiting game? Will it ever reach a climax? Again, honestly, I do not know, but something has to give, either from PC gamers, which seem dug in on their side, or from Sony, and we know where they stand. As always, I look forward to reading any and all of your feedback on this one. At least to me, the answer is simple. And on the surface, it would give PC gamers exactly what they want, both autonomy and protection, while also opening up a large section of planet Earth to buy and enjoy PlayStation games. But there's something missing, an unspoken element here that is yet to come to light. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting subscribe and ringing that notifications bell so you receive my future upload alerts. Until the next one, this is LtBuzzLitebeer signing off.